Welcome, welcome to the January 7th ProfessionalVMware.com vBrownbag. Yay, it's the first vBrownbag of 2015, so hopefully everyone had a good and relaxing holiday break. And we're going to jump right back into our DevOps series tonight. We're going to be talking Jenkins CI with Mike Marseglia. He also, I believe, has a demo prepared for us as well. Just some show notes. You can join in on the conversation using the vBrownbag hashtag, and you can also use the GoToMeeting window to ask any questions or leave comments. Also remember that we have other podcasts going on globally, so please check those out. You can also download the shows via iTunes or from ProfessionalVMware.com. I'm your host, Ahmad Yunus. You can find me on Twitter at Ahmad_Yunus. And I'm going to hand it over now to Mike so he can give us some Jenkins goodness.
Great. Thanks.
And there you go.
All right. Okay, so get to my presentation here. Here we go. All right. Hey, so hi, everyone. My name is Mike. And by day, I'm a systems engineer, and I work primarily with Linux and Puppet and Jenkins, too. Jenkins is one of the things I work with. So I hope to talk to you a little bit about it today and kind of share what I've learned using Jenkins. We're going to just quickly go over what the CI in Jenkins stands for, continuous integration, a basic intro to Jenkins, some alternatives, some Jenkins concepts, how you might have it working, basic architecture diagram, really basic. Jenkins integration, where does it play well with others? And then I've got some demos that I've been working on too, some basic installed setup, some deployment using Puppet, and hopefully some automated code testing. We can get to that too. All right, so what is continuous integration? What's the CI stand for? What's Jenkins all about? Basic textbook definition, we're talking about software development and continuous integration being the process which developers consistently integrate their code to a shared repository lots of times, right? And the reason they do this is to avoid any merge conflicts later on. So they don't want to step on anyone's toes. They want to constantly get their code into that shared repo, and that check-in is then verified by an automated build, so that allows the code to consistently move forward. You know, don't want to introduce any bugs or anything into the code. To automate that continuous integration process, you have Jenkins. Jenkins is software, automates the integration process. Have brief history into Jenkins. It's a system formerly known as Hudson. So if you're looking at the Jenkins code or you're reading some of the Jenkins docs, looking at the logs, you see lots of references to Hudson. You're scratching your head, what's this Hudson thing? Came out of Sun Microsystems. Project was forked after a small spat with Oracle, and it's been going on ever since. And Jenkins has since received more development, I think, than Hudson really has at this point. The old project is still around. At its core, Jenkins is really just a Java server, and it's used to execute user-defined jobs. So you're presented with a web UI, go in, create a job, Jenkins runs the job. Is Jenkins orchestration? Well, yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's kind of orchestration because you can define and run workflows. Jenkins has really matured over the years from just running simple jobs to actually being able to build a whole pipeline. You can take Jenkins and you can run a job, you can receive a response, an error code, and then you can have Jenkins then act on that error code, thereby building an entire pipeline of jobs. So if build doesn't work properly, a script errors out, something, you can have Jenkins then do something else. Is it a replacement for vCenter Orchestrator? This being the vBrownbag, talk about VMware, so VMware has vCenter Orchestrator. That's definitely an orchestration tool. Jenkins really isn't a like-for-like replacement for vCenter Orchestrator, my opinion. The reason why is that Jenkins, the web UI, and the plugins, as we'll see, are really geared towards software development. This is a fact. There's lots of plugins for Jenkins, but it's really designed for a software development tool, not really like a orchestrator tool like vSphere Orchestrator is. It's a little bit different. There are some alternatives to Jenkins. There's Travis CI, which is very popular with GitHub. It integrates well with GitHub. I haven't used it myself, but the theory with Travis CI is that it's a continuous integration server as a service. So you don't need to install any software. You simply configure Travis CI to point to your repository, and on a commit to that repository, it'll simply pick it up, run your integration tests, and then report back. No software to install or configure. Very simple to use. Cron or a Windows scheduler. Jenkins, again, with these jobs, as we'll see, has this cron-like ability. So you could use cron or another scheduler to perform similar tests to what Jenkins performs, although definitely won't be as robust. But you could use Jenkins as a replacement for your cron. You could think of Jenkins as almost like a centralized job management system. And instead of having to configure cron or Windows scheduler on a dozen hosts or hundreds of hosts, you could use Jenkins in a way to kind of manage some of those jobs centrally so that you're not having to check and say, oh, did I configure that cron job on the Windows server or the web server or not? It was supposed to clear logs out, but I don't remember. Jenkins could help you manage something like that in a central location. So there's some alternatives there and some similarities. So Jenkins CI concepts as a software development tool. You would have a VCS, a version control system. You would have a Jenkins Master and then a Jenkins node. The master would be your full Jenkins install. You'd be presented with a web UI. The Jenkins web UI is where you would create, manage, and schedule your jobs. You would assign jobs to nodes if you needed them to run on a separate node. It would interface with your VCS. You could run a job on a commit, so there's the ability to integrate Jenkins via a webhook, via the REST API. So it can receive that message that a commit has been added to the VCS and then run a specific job. You'd simply put that URL in your VCS. You can then merge those commits if the tests pass or throw an email if they error out. The master can run jobs. It can use what they call an executor, and you can configure the master to run jobs there. But it's not recommended in a production environment. If you read through the docs, they recommend that the master simply be responsible for things like access control, installing plugins, creating the jobs, providing that front-end UI, and then managing which jobs get assigned to which nodes, and then having those nodes actually run the jobs. The node has a minimal Jenkins install. It's going to run one or more executors, which is going to run those jobs, and then return those results to the master. That way, if a node goes down because a job got hung up, or if a node runs out of executors or something goes wrong with it, your whole Jenkins install isn't pooched. You can actually get into the master and still use the web UI and try and fix the problem, assign jobs to different nodes, or maybe take that node out of the picture without having to worry about the integrity of your entire Jenkins install. So if this is something you want to scale out, you definitely want to have at least one master and one node. But if you're going to play around with it, you could get away with just one master and run some jobs on it, and it would be perfectly fine. As far as Jenkins and integrating with other systems, there's a page of plugins. I've got a URL here that's way too long to list. Jenkins has more plugins than you could possibly shake a stick at. There's plugins for every single major version control system, Git, Subversion, SVN, and CVS. I mean, it's just outrageous how many plugins Jenkins actually has. There's one specifically for vSphere, which I haven't used but did find, that allows you to control VMs in vCenter to actually use them as Jenkins nodes. So the theory there would be, you need more nodes, let's connect to vCenter, spin them up on demand, and be able to have them run some jobs when we don't need them anymore, delete them. Make it an elastic pool of workers that Jenkins can leverage without having to have, say, one or a dozen nodes just kind of sitting there idle. There's LDAP and Active Directory plugins for Jenkins, a true Active Directory plugin, not just an LDAP one, so you can use that as your authentication backend. Again, the version control systems, all the major VCSs are supported. There's even some specific ones for GitHub that you can use. Jenkins integration is really only limited by your imagination. You can go ahead and try out any number of plugins. The Jenkins CI website is very detailed as to plugin development, tracking plugin vitality, looking at the install base, when it was last updated, and you'll be able to pick and choose which plugins are right for you, if they're viable or not. Getting support for Jenkins is pretty easy. They're pretty active on Freenode, and they have a channel. There's also a mailing list, and there's user conferences, which I went to in Boston, and it was great. There are lots of good info there. You can also get paid support. There are lots of companies that do it, but the most important one, I think, is CloudBees, and that's primarily because they have as their CTO Kasuke, and he helped found Jenkins, the Jenkins founder, and he works on the core code. So if this was something that you wanted to look for support, CloudBees is definitely one of the companies that you would look for to do that. You would pay them for that. But there's plenty of free support out there, and as Jenkins works, it's very easy to support unless you need something fancy. CloudBees, with their license, you also get some special CloudBees Enterprise Jenkins plugins, which gives you some added functionality, lets you kind of create some what they call folders plus, and which allows you to just kind of separate jobs a little bit more. And they have a few other plugins in there as well. I'm not sure about all the details, but it's definitely out there. Okay, now we've reached the point where I've got some demos. So we've got a couple install scenarios we're going to go over. I've got basic install, which is just, let's just spin up the Linux VM and install Jenkins. We've also got a way to deploy Jenkins via Puppet and using the Jenkins Puppet modules. And then we'll look at testing some code, actually creating some jobs, and configuring Jenkins. So first, the basic install. This is a repo that I have here. It's a Vagrant Jenkins repo on GitHub. You can go ahead and grab that if you want and take a look. We'll be looking at some of the code. Very simple. It takes about 3 minutes to deploy this. We're going to kick off the deployment now and then come back to it. While it's deploying, we'll take a look at the Puppet install. All of these repos do need some sort of access to the internet. That will be downloading some of the Jenkins code. This will create 2 VMs for you using Vagrant, and then you can use it to experiment with Vagrant and kind of get a feel for just creating jobs and doing some other things with it. Just uses a basic shell provisioner to actually install Jenkins and install the prereqs, specifically Java, on the node itself.
So we actually have our first question.
Oh, sure.
So Linux only, no Windows Visual Studio integration?
There is Windows integration. Jenkins, I think, does run on Windows. There are plugins for Windows. Jenkins definitely did not leave Windows out there because there is a lot of development, obviously, that happens. I don't have a lot of experience with that, though, since most of my experience is on Linux. So unfortunately, I couldn't really include that in my talk, but there definitely is Windows integration out there for it. Okay, these demos are going to just focus on the Linux side, but you could definitely find it. I think there's a Linux, there's definitely a Linux node plugin, so you can turn a Windows plugin, node plugin, so you can turn a Windows machine into a Jenkins node and run jobs there. And I think there's plugins also for the Windows-specific programming languages. Again, off the top of my head, I can't recall since it's not something I deal with on a daily basis.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. So this is the Vagrant Jenkins repository. I've got it downloaded on my Mac here. And I'm just going to do a quick Vagrant status. Okay, and we can see that the machines are not created. So to use this repo, it's pretty simple. You just need to edit the options if you had to change networking options or the host names. Other than that, just Vagrant that up. Like I said, this will take about 5 minutes because of my internet connection while I was at the office. It took about 3. It does download the Jenkins software. As this is going, we'll take a look at the repo, and we'll actually look at some of the scripts and see how it's going to create these VMs. So here's the Vagrant Jenkins repository on GitHub. And what that's doing right now with when I initiated a Vagrant up, it's going to take a look at the vagrant.yaml file. It's going to create 2 VMs for me. Here's their IPs, 138.10, 138.14. One I've labeled as Jenkins, the other one's going to be Node. So this is going to be our Jenkins Master, this is going to be our Jenkins Node. And they're going to run a provisioning shell script, or a provisioner. So we're going to use the provisioner shell for Jenkins in order, for Vagrant in order to install Jenkins on both these servers. We'll look at the provisioner script here. Simple shell script. First thing we're going to do is drop IP tables because that seems to get in the way all the time. Next thing, we're going to create an etc host file on both VMs. And we're going to put in the IP addresses and the host names so that they can talk to each other without having to worry about DNS. We're going to install Git and Java on both these VMs. Again, these VMs are CentOS, so we're using Yum. I chose a base box from the Vagrant Cloud from Puppet Labs because I trusted that one and I need a CentOS VM. So you can use whatever VM or base box you'd like. This one just happens to use CentOS. For the Jenkins Master, what we're going to do is these instructions are taken directly from the Jenkins CI website. We're going to go ahead and grab the repo, and then we're going to install it. Here we're going to install the key, then we're going to install Jenkins, we're going to add the service, we're going to turn it on, and then we're going to start it. And that's it. After that, this will give us one server that's running the Jenkins, the actual Jenkins software, the master, as a master, and give us a web UI. The other one will have Java installed on it, and we'll be able to configure it as a node in the master itself after it's actually turned up. That's all there is to this one. It's a very basic, but it works. And see here, it's still going. So right now, it's just while we're talking, it's already downloaded and installed Jenkins, and it's completed it okay. So Jenkins should be started. Right now it's working on our node. So let's go ahead and see if we can talk to that. Now if we look at the documentation here, let's see if I was correct. Looks like I put the wrong IP address in there. Let's see. Or maybe I put the right one in. Let's look at the vagrant.yaml. Yep. I'll need to update the README. So it looks like the Jenkins Master is actually going to be on this IP address here. And that's what I have in this web browser. And Chrome reloaded it for me. So here's that Jenkins server that we just provisioned. And there it is. It's brand new. Now we can manage this one. We can configure it. We can add nodes to it. We can add that node. See if it's done. No, it's not done yet, so we can't do that. But we can add plugins. We can configure it for security. Pop to a few of these. When you're configuring Jenkins, everything happens in here. Notice this is straight HTTP as well, so right now nothing's encrypted. If you're doing this for production, you'd want to go back, harden this, recognizing that HTTP is the default. Switch that to HTTPS. Here's all of our Jenkins options. And let's see, go back to Jenkins. You can configure global security here. There's a couple different security methods that you can enable. I'm not going to do this. You can lock yourself out of this pretty easily, but it's also just as easily to get back to it if you do accidentally do it. Here's your authorization modes: legacy mode, logged in users can do anything, matrix-based or project-based. So you can also have this kind of like roles and profiles kind of view of Jenkins. We're able to create these projects and have permissions inherited. You can get very sophisticated with your security in here. I'm just going to leave that off just to make sure I don't accidentally lock myself out of anything. Here's the plugins. Everyone wants to see plugins. So someone asked about Windows plugins, right? So let's look at what's available. So it's grabbing this list in real time. It'll download these plugins from the internet. Oh, look at PowerShell plugin. Ooh. You know, Windows EXE Runner, Azure Storage, published over CIFS. I think you're asking about .NET. I don't see a .NET, but it's PowerShell. Let's see. They have a .NET. Don't really see it, but you would, if you want to install one of these, let's say like Git, filter it all out. Here's a plugin for GitLab, Git client. Let's see, Git plugin. So I can check this box and then click install and it will install it. If I click on the link, it'll bring me to the official plugin page. You can see how many installations there are, again, vitality of the project, latest release. So as you're going through these plugins, as I explained earlier, you can really pick out the good from the bad based on how well they're doing here. We can also see that looks like Kosuke is one of the tracking maintainers too, which is always a good thing to see too. You can see who's actually maintaining these projects. You'll start to recognize these names. That's plugins. Go back to managing Jenkins. So you have look at system information, which will give you some debugging, system logs. Jenkins has a CLI, which I'm not going to go over too much, but you can actually, instead of using the web UI, configure Jenkins a little bit through the CLI. You can manage credentials, so you can give Jenkins SSH keys and store them in here. So you can add SSH usernames, private keys, giving Jenkins the ability to SSH into hosts. So one possible use case for this is if you have a service account that maybe you install on some of your servers and you're doing passwordless SSH authorization, right? So you're just using SSH keys. You could give Jenkins the same kind of thing. Maybe you give it a separate account. Maybe you give it the same account, put the key in here. Now anytime you run a shell command inside of a Jenkins job, Jenkins will be able to authenticate using that key and saving the hassle of trying to build in some kind of password mechanism. You can just give it the SSH key and have it do it for you. You'll be able to log in and you can shut it down. Let's see. Oh, okay. So during that, our node installed, so that's complete. We can add the node now. So if we wanted to add a node, we go to Manage Nodes. Here we see I've got one node here. It's our master. New node. Let's call it node. It's a dumb slave. Okay, wants a remote root directory. Doesn't need to be running as root, but it needs a home. In this case, I'm using what Vagrant gives me. So I'm using the Vagrant home directory here. We're also, you can give it a description, the number of executors. Again, executors, one executor per job. So one executor is going to run a job. So here, this node is going to have the ability to run one job at a time. That's what this is telling us. You could label your nodes, and therefore when you create jobs, you can assign them to specific labels. If you have a bunch of nodes that are only going to check your Puppet code, you can just create this node as a label Puppet, and therefore any job then is restricted to run on nodes labeled Puppet. Maybe you need specific Puppet utilities, Ruby, Puppet, Puppet lint. So those nodes are customized just to test that code, and you can do that in here. Okay, we're going to launch via SSH, and I'm going to add some credentials and add the node here too, though. Let's see, if I look at our configuration, that was node.vagrant.vm. Okay, and let's see, credentials, we'll click add. SSH username with private key. The username is going to be Vagrant. Now the Vagrant SSH key is actually kept in Vagrant. Here it is here. So here's Vagrant's private key. And we'll just copy and paste that in. You can also here specify a file on the Jenkins Master, or you can use the Jenkins Master, its own home directory and its SSH folder. Okay, now that should work. Let's see if I did everything right. We'll look at the log for the node. Oh, I've got the host name wrong. That's not going to work. I think that was vnode. Let's see. I should look at the host file that we created so I get the actual host name. Oh no. No, that should be node. Okay. Let's go back then. Maybe I'm just impatient. Oh, no. SSH key failed. Okay. I ran through this demo before, but it worked. But I've obviously missed something here. So SSH key rejected. Did I pick the right SSH key? No, I didn't. This is the right SSH key. It's a little confusing because I've got a couple of Vagrant machines in there. So let's go back. Configure. So I'm going to configure the credentials. Vagrant. Let's update the private key. Save it. And go back to our nodes. Look at the log now and see if it's going to work. Looks like it's waiting. Let's see. It will retry. It looks like it's waiting here. I'm just going to continue, but timeout for last second try. Let's see. So I'm just going to keep going. But, it looks like something might not be working correctly. So, but it gets the concept across. Where if you wanted to have a node, you could do that through SSH. Okay, is there anything else I want to touch on in here? And Jenkins covered the managing nodes, credentials, managing plugins, system information. I think that pretty much covers it for this Vagrant setup. The next one would be the deploying Jenkins with Puppet and Puppet Enterprise. So this one's already provisioned because this one takes a little bit longer because this one actually installs Puppet Enterprise. You get a Puppet Master, you get a Jenkins Master, and you get, again, another Jenkins node. So I've kept this one up and running so that it won't, we don't have to wait. Again, this is on GitHub as well. And I really have to thank a Puppet engineer. Her name's Terry Haber, and she really helped provide the inspiration for this. She has a Puppet control repo, which is also great, and it's on GitHub. And I suggest you go check that out. It served as a basis for this project here. And without her, I really couldn't have done that. And her name's Terry Monster on GitHub. So it borrows from that. And again, we've got our Vagrant.YAML, which defines the VMs that we want to spin up, except this time we're going to add an extra VM. We're going to have a Puppet Master. Okay, and then we've got a whole bunch of extra directories here. Really what this is doing, this is going to pull down a complete working Puppet Enterprise environment with R10K. So it's much, you could use this for a lot more. So Terry's is pretty much is just like this, except she doesn't include the Jenkins VMs. So as a side, if you're looking for something for Puppet to get started with R10K, check out her repo. This one I've modified to include a couple Jenkins VMs so I can just spin it up and test stuff out, specifically test the Puppet Jenkins module. Got lots of extra directories for Puppet Manifest, Git hooks, sites, provisioning. Provisioning script is very different. We've got, again, the Puppet Master. Puppet Master has a login, so it's using Puppet Enterprise. So we have the web UI. Okay, and let's take a look at the provisioning script so we can see what this is actually going to do once these VMs boot up. So what this one is going to do is it's going to go ahead and grab Puppet Enterprise. Again, we're going to drop IP tables because it gets in the way. Setting our host file. It's then going to provision Puppet Enterprise on the VM. If you have SSH keys, it'll do that. If you have a repo, get the whole concept of R10K being is that it uses a repository in order to provision Puppet. And then it will run the R10K bootstrap. At this point, you may be asking, where's all the Jenkins stuff come in? So that's in our on our manifests. Let's see here. We've got a site manifest here. So this site manifest comes with the repo, and it's going to save us a step. Instead of having to classify these nodes in the Puppet Enterprise web UI, I took a shortcut and just added node definitions for them in the site.pp file, which is going to just save us a step of having to go through the web UI and add the Jenkins module to these nodes. Here we're making use of the Jenkins Puppet module here, and this is developed by Jenkins, actually, I think by some of the folks who work at CloudBees. This is not a Puppet Labs module. This is developed by Jenkins CI. Here we're going to use a long-term support version. We're going to tell Jenkins not to configure the firewall. We've got a hash of all the plugins we want to install. So here we want the Git client, we want Git, CloudBees Enterprise plugins. You get a free trial, so why not? Let's check it out. Credentials, analysis core, warnings, some basic compiler warnings, plugins, and such. And then here for the Jenkins slave or Jenkins node, we're going to make use of the Jenkins slave class, Puppet class, and we can pass the master URL to it. And this one's using HTTPS. If your Jenkins isn't set up for that, you could use HTTP. You can also pass it a username and password. You can also put this data in Hira. If you're familiar with Puppet at all, Hira is where you store all of your configuration stuff. If you don't want to clutter up your manifest, so you could easily take these parameters, store them in a Hira configuration, and leave your code clean. So that's everything that this is going to do. And like I said, I already took the liberty of bootstrapping this up, so we didn't have to wait. So let's just refresh this and make sure that everything's still here. So this is what you would get when you go to the Puppet Master and type in the password. Okay. So you would get to this point, you would authorize the two nodes. They would contact the Puppet Master after Vagrant spins up the VMs. You just go to the node requests and you say, I authorize all these nodes. And then from that point, they would run Puppet. Again, the Puppet agent would run on these VMs. It would pick up the Puppet definition we just looked at in the manifest, in the site manifest, and it would configure this one to be a master, and it would configure this one to be a Puppet slave, Puppet node. And we can see that the last run was here, and you can then play around with the Puppet code. So if you want to do something different, you want to test a new plugin, you want to do something fancy with the Jenkins Puppet code, that's what this Vagrant repository lets you do. This collection code will let you play with, specifically with Jenkins and Puppet Enterprise. So this is a different Jenkins installation. You can see we have a different IP. This is the one that the Puppet Master spun up for us. Okay, so we don't have any nodes. We have two executors. They're both idle. And if we go to Jenkins and manage nodes, you can see we just have one master. So now what I'm going to do is switch over to terminals. Let's see, we are on the Jenkins node. I want to change that. All right. So here we're on the Puppet Master VM. And if we go to the site manifest, where I just showed you all that code, and there we go, that's better. Now we can read the comments. Look here, the master URL is commented out. So we have a Jenkins node out there, but it's not currently configured to point to any master. So let's uncomment that line of code out. Now it'll install and contact the Jenkins master. The way it does this, and the way the Jenkins slave plugin works, it uses something called the Swarm plugin from Jenkins. The Swarm plugin, again, is something else you can download on your own. You don't have to use Puppet to use it, but it's exactly that. It's a swarm. You install that the application on a node, on a server, configure it to point to a Jenkins master, and it automatically registers itself with the Jenkins master. So we're going to do a Puppet agent-t, so we're going to initiate a Puppet run. It should pick up the new code. Here it goes. All right. And we see here the master URL has changed. It triggered a service refresh of the Jenkins slave service. Okay. Now we can go back to our Jenkins website, and there it is. This demo worked much better now. Now we have a node. Done. The node's registered, and it's ready to accept jobs. So that's all you had to do for it. And with Puppet, this gets really powerful because now you can spin up any number of nodes you want, assign them to be a Jenkins slave, tear them up, spin them down, do whatever you want. Puppet's just, with Puppet, you could just do a lot of different things with this. Caveat is you have to make sure that you have to, if you want plugins installed, you have to do it through the Puppet code. If you try to install a plugin that's not listed in the manifest, that's not listed in here, it'll uninstall it. It'll put the master back to the way it was. So you have to make sure if you're adding new plugins to make sure that they go in the Puppet code. Otherwise, your system state will get reverted. And if we refresh this, it should show us that it just recently changed. So we can see here there was one change as we changed the Puppet code and then initiated a run. And if we look at the log, it shows us the changes from the Jenkins plugin and what it made. And that's how you add a Jenkins node to a Jenkins master using Puppet and the Jenkins Puppet module. Now we can do some other stuff. All right, so what do we got next? So the next thing, okay, so we've already got, I'm going to use the, I'll use the other ones. I'm not certain about the first Vagrant Jenkins repo I have set up, so I'm going to use the Puppet Jenkins servers here, making sure everything works. All right, I'm going to do a little test here, so we're just going to make sure that we have the Git plugin installed, which we should. So that's what we told Puppet to do. We'll create a new job. We'll fetch a Git repo from GitHub, and then we'll run Puppet parser validate on that code. So I've already got some code here, so I don't have to retype everything. I'm just going to copy that so I can paste it into my job later. Let's go to the Jenkins Master. Let's go to Jenkins. Let's create a job. I've got a job here. We're just going to build a new one, though. So how do you build a Jenkins job? New item. Give it a name. Let's just do Puppet Test. Build a freestyle project. You can see here, I was referring to earlier about how this was really built for programmers. Here we have things referring to Maven, monitoring jobs, and see as we get through some of the job stuff, you can just see how, I said before, it's an orchestration tool, definitely, but the web UI and all the plugins really geared towards software development. So we could parameterize this job if we wanted, so we could give the user a choice. We can give them choice parameters, file parameters, password parameters, anything we want to do, string, text. So if you wanted to have a job that, say, needed to be run on multiple servers, but maybe you want to run them one at a time, or you want to give the user a choice, maybe it's something you want to hand over to your ops team, you just put a choice parameter in here. Remote server. Server 1, server 2, just keep adding it, and then you can hand it off to them. So some of those more mundane tasks, make a job, restrict the job so that no one else can edit it, but give them access to run the job, and then they can do it on their own from here on out. It reminds me of one I have. I've got a job that all it does is it logs into the host that you specify via SSH. I think it runs about half dozen or a dozen different troubleshooting commands. You know, the commands that you constantly have to run over and over again every time your CPU spikes or you're running out of disk space or whatever it is, or network performance sucks. You're praying that you're getting to the problem in time. Well, this job automatically does all that for you, and I just keep adding to it so that it's grabbing different stats and running different commands, but so I can get that snapshot really quickly. And then once I run the job, that output is saved in Jenkins with the date timestamp so that I know when I ran it and with what parameters. So it's something I can always go back to. So you can choose to do that or not. Let's see, it doesn't look like Git's installed, so we're going to have to do that. Let's see, I thought it should have installed that too. We're going to need that to make this work. So let's manage Jenkins, manage plugins. It's available. Because I didn't see it in that list, so. This is how easy installing plugins are. Find it from the list, click install, goes out to the internet, fetches latest version, even tells you when plugins need to be updated. I really should have thought it installed it though. It's odd. Okay, all right. Looks like it's installed now. Let's try and go into that job again. Here we are, Git. Okay, repository. Let's see. Well, I've got some Puppet code in this repository. Not a lot, but I've got at least one. That's good enough for a test. I'm going to have to go grab that shell script again. Let's see. Failed to connect to repository. Does it not have Git installed? Let's see. Git's not installed. You need Git to use the Git repository. So only take a second. Once Git's installed, then this error message will go away. And I actually think I had planned to do this demo on the other VM, and I didn't test it on this VM, and I didn't realize that I was missing Git. Okay, that's done, so now it should. There we go. Now that error message goes away. We don't need any credentials for this because that's open. Now, for that repository, I don't have a master branch. I actually have a production branch. It's the way R10K works. So without getting too specific about it, but that's my branch. So you can specify your branch. You can specify credentials if you want. You can add more than one repository. Add advanced options as well. Let's say you don't want to clone all the history, so you want to do a shallow clone. You could do that, which will shorten the length of time that it actually needs to grab the repository. Now for the build step, we'll just execute a basic shell. And I need to go back and grab my shell code. So we're just going to grab this quick little script. Nothing fancy. So what this is going to do is for every file we find that ends in .pp, run puppet parser validate for Bose debug on that file. That's it. If there's any errors, puppet parser should find them. So this is just validating the puppet code. And I only have one file, and it shouldn't have any errors, so we're not going to see anything, but we will see the commands run, but we shouldn't see any errors. So let's see if this works. That's it. Now after this, you would just build scheduled. Oh, and it failed. It gives you a nice, helpful red dot. Now it's timestamp, and we can go and click on this, and we can look at the console output. Puppet's not installed. That's weird. Why isn't Puppet installed? You'd think that would be installed on there. Let's see. Unless it's not where it wants it, if it's not in the path. So let's look for Puppet. Puppet might not be in the path, so let's specify the full path. So we can go in, so even if your script has errors, it'll find that and it will kick it back out to you. Let's go back and configure our project. And we'll replace Puppet with the full path. We'll save that. Oh, I don't think I touched. Here's some of the post-build actions. Talked about chaining some of these jobs. You could build other projects. You can archive the artifacts of the projects, scan it for compiler warnings, which you can get also do with the Puppet code, but other pieces of code as well, and then it will give you a nice graph of all the warnings. And you can do an email notification as well. There's lots of stuff you can do once the job's actually complete. Let's try building that now. See what happens. We get a little progress bar. Some projects take longer than others, and you'll see that progress bar. This one finished successfully. Console output. And you can see the command as it's running. Now Puppet parser won't output anything if it doesn't find anything wrong. So I tried to give it as much info as it could, but here it's just not finding anything. If we were running Puppet lint, it would give us a lot more in terms of output. But here you can see it just found all the files in the workspace where it pulls the repository from. And when it does its checkout, it grabs all the files and checks them. And that's it. Now, you can imagine how powerful this gets, right? When you're talking about Jenkins, you have these jobs. If they can be triggered remotely from the REST API, or you can have Jenkins monitor your version control system for changes. Either way, so Jenkins will do a polling of a VCS, or you can have your VCS notify Jenkins when a commit or a merge or some other action has taken place. Either way, once the job is triggered and it grabs that code and it does whatever tests you want to do on, So let's say if you're doing just first level tests, let's just say it's a commit to a new branch, right? And you want to make sure that that branch is up to par syntactically, and that there's no other functional errors in there. So you could configure Jenkins to just run all the tests you want on that, and if there's any errors, you kick it back to the developer with an email. Say, hey, your build failed, here's your email, or you could post it to whatever. I think there's a hip chat plugin for this as well, so you could have it post to a channel, however you'd like people to get notified. But let's say you've got a merge request. So merge request comes in. From the request comes in from a developer. Version control system gets it, says, hey, I've got a merge request. Kicks off a Jenkins job, says, hey, Jenkins, got a merge request. Jenkins has a merge request for this repo. Great, let's check it out. Does a checkout of the code. It then validates the code. If it doesn't find anything wrong, automatically merges the request. So now the code's automatically merged. And it's up to you. Some people don't like that. They want to be able to get their eyes on the code. They don't want the computer to automatically merge it for them, but you could. In this case, you could have Jenkins automatically do it for you if you wanted to. You could have, for example, in a Puppet deployment or a Chef deployment where you've got a Chef server or a Puppet server, you're working on Puppet code or Chef code, you push that code out. On the receive, Jenkins then checks out the code, makes sure everything's good. If it's good, commits it back to your production branch. Once it's in production branch, it gets deployed automatically, and that's it. Now you've got your software development pipeline, and it just works. And most of it's automated. So I love Jenkins. It's been a great tool. It's a godsend. I haven't found troubleshooting it too difficult. There's some Java memory parameters you might have to tune now and again, but it's been rock solid for me. It's been very stable and very helpful, both as a software development tool and as a tool for systems administration, because it's just so versatile. That is the last demo I had, just showing how to do a git checkout and then validate some code. Are there any other questions about Jenkins, or maybe how I use it, or how anyone else would like to use it, or anything else?
Do you have this currently implemented in your environment at work?
Yes, we do. We do use Jenkins very heavily for everything that we do. So it's not only testing code, but it's also deploying code as well. So it's used pretty heavily. What else did I say about the? I like the user conference. I like the CloudBees. I like the user conference. I like kind of where they're going with the product as well. I think the project itself has some good direction to it. The plugins are well maintained. The documentation is very good. It's just a good piece of software to have. I think it's a good tool in the arsenal. If you're not a software developer, even if you're just a systems administrator, again, just using it almost like as a centralized cron, I think has some value. Being able to keep those jobs centrally located, and it gives you something to hand off to a help desk or to operations, and say, here, when you see this go wrong, run this job on the server. Collect some diagnostic info for us, so they're not sitting there manually typing out commands. You can just give them this web UI. It's very easy to use, and have them just run the job, whatever it is they need.
Right. So we do have some questions. Dan is asking, are the plugins checked by anyone before being added to the repo?
Are the plugins checked by anyone before being added to the repo? Well, so it depends. I guess if you were talking about like developing a software development pipeline, like as in like a Puppet plugin, is that? I'm not sure.
So he just elaborated a little bit more. He said to make sure they work, aren't, there's no malware or anything like that going on.
Oh, in the Jenkins repo, okay. That's a good question. I don't know. That's a good question. I would, if I was installing plugins from the Jenkins repository, in order to avoid any possible shenanigans, look for the ones that are authored by Kosuke or other folks that are part of the core team. We can skip back to that if you like to take a look at some of those. I think it's pretty obvious. I think when you look at some of these plugins, where they're coming from and who's authoring them, so that if you just like if you were installing a Puppet module or if you use any other piece of code from any other configuration management system, Chef, Ansible, whatever your soup du jour is, it always pays to do some research. So I don't think there's an authority checking the plugins. Just like I'm pretty sure there's no authority checking the Vagrant base boxes either. It's up to the individual to do their homework and check it out for themselves.
Okay. Graham is asking, makes sense to deploy something like Jenkins? I think you've already touched base on some, unless you have any other examples or...
No, I can't really think of any. I mean, I think it fits if you're a software developer.
Oh, I'm sorry. How big of a project? Sorry, I didn't see that. Yeah, I didn't see that part in the question.
It's not really. I mean, so I mean, we saw if we look at which code is it? There it is. So if we look at this is the provisioning script. If you were just to install Jenkins on your own, you would quite literally just run these, these 6 commands on a CentOS system, and boom, you've got Jenkins installed. I mean, that's just to install the software itself. And then once you'll want to lock it down, so you turn on HTTPS, and then maybe you add a few local users. You could do that very easily. Active Directory integration is very easy to set up. That's so you can take that administrative burden off. And then once you've done that, that's the majority of your setup. And then after that, it's really creating jobs and maybe installing plugins if the base functionality doesn't work for you. The one thing to keep an eye on with Jenkins in a production environment, these executors over here we can see on the left, and the executor status. If you have too many people trying to run jobs, and you either have a job that's hung up, or you don't have enough resources to run all your jobs, you'll start to see some resource issues there. And there's one job per executor, and the rule of thumb is you only want as many executors as you have CPU. So if you want to be able to run 4 jobs concurrently, you want to be able to have 4 vCPU or 4 CPU on that virtual machine, and then do it accordingly. Again, if you're production, don't put any executors on the master. Use those on your nodes. I hope that helps to answer that question.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I'm free to chat too. If people want to talk some more, just a little bit later on about possible ways to deploy it or other scenarios, and some of my experience. I'm glad to sit and chat and hang around for a while. Talk about some of the plugins and everything.
Well, if we don't have any more questions, I'm going to stop the recording. But thank you so much, Mike, for the presentation and demo.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. It was my pleasure.
Sure. Let me get the recording stopped.